Hi guys, I thought I'll do another video, this time on AP and the Royal Oak in particular. And the question that I'm trying to answer here is, which is the perfect size Royal Oak? Or in other words, is the 37mm Royal Oak the perfect size? And we're going to talk about the standard Royal Oaks here, so time, date only, so to speak, the classic versions of them. So let's get right into it. I'm not going to spend too much time on packaging. You got this standard, I guess, cardboard box. You got a styrofoam inlay, I guess that's what it is. And then you got this wooden box. And, you know, again, we buy watches, I guess, for the watch and not for packaging, but for what it's worth, I personally prefer the box from AP versus Rolex, at least on the outside. It's a wooden box. I mean, AP it is a different brand, different positioning versus Rolex. I guess they produce round about, I don't guess, I know that they produce round about 40,000 watches a year versus Rolex. It's not a public listed company, but people assume they produce around about 1 million watches a year. So from the outside, nice box. If you open it up, inside leather, non-structured leather. I'm not too much of a fan of it. In my view, perfection is going to be the Patek box, but then again, that's a different story. Let's go right to the watch, which is, I guess, what we want to speak about. And before we speak about this particular watch, which is the 37mm version, maybe a couple words about the Royal Oak lineup. So if you want to buy a time and date only watch, Royal Oak that is, what's on offer? So there's this watch right here, the 37mm, reference 15450 ST for steel. And also I'm obviously going to focus on steel watches only in this video. And then there's a 41mm version, which is reference 15500 ST. It used to be the 15400. They upgraded it or made some changes to it, has a new movement, etc. And those two watches are priced very similarly. 37 is going to cost you, I think, $21,700 US. And then the 41 is going to come in at $22,900. Those watches in steel, there's a couple of different dial variations available. The 37 comes in silver, sometimes also called white, gray, and blue. And the 41 has the same three options, even though they call the gray now the ruthenium gray. They call it, I think, slate gray, but I believe it's very much the same color as in the 37. But in addition to those three colors, so silver, white, whatever you want to call it, gray and blue, the 41 is also going to come in black. Now, what's the third option, you ask, maybe? Well, there's a third option indeed, and that's going to be in between the two, size-wise at least, the 39mm. Now, the 39mm is also called the Jumbo or the Ultra Thin, and is, as AP would call it, a very special Royal Oak. It's really an homage, you could say, to the original Royal Oak, which came out in 1972, and it's very, very close to the original. In terms of pricing, there's quite a difference. The 39mm is going to cost you $28,900 US. That is, if you're obviously able to obtain it, because this is the hardest or one of the hardest to obtain AP sport watches out there. What's the difference? Well, it's called Ultra Thin and has a different movement, doesn't have a seconds hand, is, I would say, a rather delicate watch. Not to say you can't wear it on a daily basis, but you know, it doesn't have a screw down crown. It only has a pull push crown. You could do light swimming, but I guess not a lot of people would do that with the 39. Has a different movement, basically. I think it's very much the same movement that they used back in the day with some very, very slight variations. And I'm going to personally rule that out because first and foremost, for me personally, I'd like to see a watch work. I'd like to see it, no pun intended, I'd like to see it tick. And if it doesn't have a seconds hand, the only way to see if that watch is ticking or not or working is to, you know, flip it around and look at the movement. But I don't know about you, but, you know, most of the times I wear my watches on my wrist, and so I wouldn't see it working. Also, as I said, it's a bit more delicate. And me personally, it's certainly a very, very beautiful watch, but I'm not super keen on having an Ultra Thin Royal Oak, right? I kind of like the watch to be a bit more hefty, a bit more sporty, but that's just me. So I would rule that one out. And then in terms of sizing, what's important to know, so what I would also rule out, obviously, is the 41. It's not obvious, but in my opinion, The 41 is just too hefty. It's even bigger than the 39, which is the classic Royal Oak. And this is really a result of the trend that, was developed over the last couple of years in regards to the size of watches becoming bigger and bigger. Now, I believe the 41 is just way too big, because basically if you blow the watch up, you're going to blow up everything in order to keep the proportions intact. And that also means that the bracelet and everything is going to become much bigger. And in my opinion, it's just too hefty, too big of a watch. If you have a very big wrist, you probably could wear it. But again, I'm not a fan of it. If you want to have such a large watch, then I would go offshore, but that's a completely different route. Now, it's important to know that even though the 37 and the 39 are only 2 millimeters apart from each other, they're going to vary quite differently. Because if you look at that angle here, obviously because the 37 is thicker, this is going to have a different angle. The case is going to slope downwards in a different angle on the 37 versus the 39. So the 39 will have a flatter case structure. That means the minimum wrist span required will be quite a bit more on the 39 versus the 37. So I ruled out the 41 for me personally because I have small wrists. I rule out the 39 because of day-to-day use, the looks of the watch for me personally. So that leaves the 37. And if I look at the 37 and I put it on the wrist, I have really a small wrist. And I'm not going to say the watch is too small, don't get me wrong, right? I even think it looks even nicer if you have a bigger wrist than I have. But one thing that I don't like is the size of the dial. I think it's just too small. And the dimensions of the 37, some people will tell you, are not that perfect because basically the watch is just too thick for the size of the dial that it has. But leaving that aside, I personally just find I can live with the thickness, I guess is what I'm trying to say, but I just find the dial too small. So in my opinion, for me personally, there's two ways to circumvent this, right? One would be to go with a different dial combination or the dial variation. And I know everyone's talking about the blue dial, and blue is actually one of my favorite colors, but if not my favorite color, but I don't think this is the nicest blue that I've ever seen, okay? I don't think the hype is justified, at least on that particular model, because why would you hype the blue dial? Well, because the original was blue. But then again, if you really want to have the original, you would have to buy the 39. And if you want to have a really, really nice blue, in my opinion, you don't buy this. You certainly don't buy the Sky Dweller, which is a completely different story. But I think, in my opinion, the nicest blue is on the Patek 5711. But different story. So what would I do? I much rather prefer the gray dial. It looks really, really nice. I'm going to try to include a picture in this video. I was, trying that watch on a while ago. And while we're at it, I was also trying on, just for fun, a fully iced out and mind you, factory set diamond setting of this particular model. I think this watch is going to cost you, I don't know, $150, I guess, upwards. But just a fun side note. I guess, looking at all those wrappers, they all have those diamond set watches, but most of them are really not factory settings. Anyway, back to reality. Obviously, I wouldn't buy the diamond one, but one way to go for me would be get this one with the gray dial. And why? Because the dial is going to blend in more with the rest of the watch, with the case, and not going to make that, small dial as obvious as it is with the blue one. The second option, and I think really this is the option that I'm going to go for, is the 38 mil. And this is not a time and date only watch. It's a chrono. And this is why I initially ruled it out. But if you think about it, why would you buy an AP or why would you buy a Royal Oak? Because of the case, shape, and the bracelet. I always say if you only buy one AP, one Royal Oak, don't buy an offshore. Because so much what determines the attractiveness of this watch is the actual bracelet and its finish. And unlike Rolex, where the Submariner is a classic, the GMT is a classic, and the Daytona is a classic, and there are three very different watches, at least let's say the Sub and the Daytona, or the GMT and the Daytona. With the APs, with the Royal Oaks, what's really classic about them is the case, the bracelet. And you get that with the chronograph as well. And so what I would say is the go-to option is the 38mm chrono, and actually not even, again, in the so-called panda dial variation, white or silver and blue subdials, but again in the ruthenium gray variation, which is, I'm not going to call it a sleeper watch, but certainly not as hyped up as all the other watches. And, you know, I don't know about you, but I want to buy ultimately what I like, what I believe is a beautiful watch, a good watch, and not really the latest hype. So sometimes you can get carried away with all those, you know, reviews we see on the web and social media, and we really neglect some of those watches. And I think the offshore, sorry, not the offshore, certainly not the offshore, but the chronograph is a very, very nice alternative. So one thing maybe I want to mention at the end of this video, one thing that I really, really like about this one and that the chronograph unfortunately doesn't have is the see-through case. So you can see this very nicely finished and decorated movement. You can see here on this, I think it's an 18 karat, is it even, I think it's even 24, I'm not sure. Sorry, a bit confused, but the rotor here is in solid gold, and you can see the emblems of the Audemars and Piguet family. And this is something really, really nice. The chronograph doesn't have that because it's not a 100% in-house AP movement. So this is certainly a plus for this watch. So what's my verdict? Can you sport the 37? You know, it was initially marketed as a ladies' watch. Now they call it a unisex. In my opinion, you could get away with it, even if you have bigger wrists than I do. But I find the dial size a bit problematic, which is why I would go with the gray variation. I hope I covered everything. If you let me know what you think about it in the comments, ask any questions. If I can answer, I'll certainly do. And yeah, let me know what you think about it and if you agree or disagree, and I'll hope to see you soon again.